I heard he fell asleep. And I think it was right after he was writing me about not missing it up. Must have been routine. I guess the first one was all day, but the others were just.
I remember that Germany was helped.
That's
Hollandaise for like $40.
Wow.
Our friends.
Mr. Starkey, can you let me know if you're ready? Whoa. I just turned off the podium mic, so.
Hello? Hello?
George, we're just getting you in for the Board of Canvassers meeting.
Hello?
You better talk to him.
Mr. Stewart, can you hear us okay? We're hearing you.
I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So we ready to go?
Going all counts.
All right. We would like to begin this meeting of the Provo City Board of Canvassers. The time is 5:36 p.m. It's Tuesday, September 5th, 2017. We're convened in the City Center Municipal Council chambers. We'd like to call the meeting to order and begin with a roll call.
Cliff Strachan.
Brian Jones.
David Harding.
Kim Santiago.
Dave Sewell.
Dave Connect.
Gary Winterton.
Wayne Parker.
George Stewart.
And we'd like to excuse Mr. Van Buren and Mayor Curtis. So we are convened to discuss a resolution of the Mayor and Municipal Council sitting as the Board of Canvassers, accepting the election results and declaring and certifying the results of the recount vote for the primary election held for the Provo City Council citywide number 1 position. And this item will be presented to us by our City Recorder, Janine Weiss.
Board members, thank you again for this opportunity. Hello? Oh, okay. Thank you for this opportunity. As you well know, last Tuesday we met as a Board of Canvassers to certify the results of the primary election. And in the citywide 1 race, the vote difference between Wesley Marriott and Hunter Phillips, second and third place was only 11 votes. And so Hunter Phillips submitted a request to the City Recorder's Office to have that recount. So we submitted our request to the Utah County Election Office, and they were able to start the recount on Friday and finally finish it on Saturday. It's been a long weekend for them. And the results are shown up above. Since this was just a recount for those 2 positions, in this report we did not show all of the votes. We just simply showed the votes for the 2 for the 2 candidates that would be involved. So as the results of the recount are as follows: Wesley Marriott received 2,129 votes, and Hunter Phillips received 2,102 votes. So after the recount, it's been determined that Wesley Marriott will be nominated to be put on the ballot for the citywide 1 position. And are there any questions? I might add that with us today is Brian Thompson. He is a representative. He's the Utah County Clerk. And he will be here to answer any questions that we have concerning the counts. Kelsey, could you go to the summary report? You'll notice, and Dave Sewell sent us an email and indicated, Chair Sewell sent us an email and indicated that he noticed there was a discrepancy in the number of votes cast in the original election and then in the recount. A total of 141 votes difference between the 2. And so Amanda, Brian Jones, and I met with Brian Thompson this morning. Mr. Thompson indicated that he was aware of it and that they were working on it. And so if you have any questions concerning that procedure, you could invite Mr. Thompson up to talk about that.
Great. We would love to hear from Mr. Thompson about how that transpired. Thank you.
We're still looking into the situation, but essentially what happens in a recount is we go through and we turn off all the races but the race we're recounting. And I personally supervised this recount and was involved. I know that we were extra careful in this race in making sure we adjudicated all the ballots. By adjudicated, that means wherever someone crossed out one of the candidates' names and then made a mark somewhere else, the system that we're using automatically flags that, and then a person has to adjudicate it and look and see if they can tell where voter intent is. And usually you can see the scribble out on the one and then the check mark on the other, and you can tell. That's why there were two marks that were scanned and caught. Through that process, you naturally will get a few more votes, especially as we were really careful in this and double checking all that. But the margin that came up of 141 additional votes in this race was something that caused us to look at it more closely. We have actually, with it being the holiday weekend, we weren't able to start until this morning, but we have been talking to our election vendor and also our IT person that was involved with doing the results happened to go on vacation after our canvass on the 29th. He'll be back on Monday. But we're looking at all the different batches to try to explain this. I will say that statistically, those additional votes pretty much, even though Mr. Marriott picked up a few more, maintained the same statistical pattern of votes. And so for the most part, we feel that those additional votes, those same pattern would carry across. But at this point, I don't have anything definitive to say because we're still looking into it, but definitely want to be open, let you know what was going on, and let you know that we will keep the city recorder, Janine, apprised, along with Mr. Jones, who met with me this morning, and just keep you updated. If you have specific questions for me, I'm willing to answer those. Or
I had a question. This is Mr. Stewart. Would the race for second and third place in the mayor's race was relatively close, less than that number of votes that you say were not counted in that race? Could you give us an assurance that that wouldn't have changed had those votes been counted in that race?
Councilman Stewart, I understand your concern, and that's actually one of the things that we looked at because of the difference between second and third place in that mayoral race. Now, there was a 126 vote difference in the mayoral race. Am I correct, Janine? 129, okay. So somewhere right in there. And we're looking overall at 150 votes. 141 of them showed up in this race because there were a lot of undervotes. There were actually a lot of people that did not vote in the citywide race or in the second district race that was also on the ballot. But in that situation, 150 votes, and there's currently a 129 vote margin. Statistically, from my election experience, you would see the same trend as was checked in this race, and everybody would get some votes, and there probably was not enough. But can I give you 100% surety of that? At this point, I cannot.
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, could you explain where the number 150 comes from? Because just looking at the numbers, I can only see the 141 difference in the totals.
It's if you compare the times cast up there. There's 13,224, and the times cast in the original election was 13,074, and that's the 150 votes.
So that's the difference in the voters that voted in any of the three races? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so even if they voted blank ballot, that's the difference, yeah.
And just, I don't know, for those of you who are kind of numbers geeks like me, the 9-vote difference between 141 and 150 is almost the exact same percentage as those who voted in the mayoral race and did not vote in the citywide race based on the original numbers. So that carried for the same percentage of people who voted in one but not the other carried forward into that 150, which to some degree gives support to the idea that the spread of the votes would also be similar. And it, by my calculation, it would take 87% of the vote of those 150 uncounted votes to be received by one candidate to make a difference in that mayoral race.
Ms. Santiago?
So what would be the process to recount those votes in the mayoral race? Is that a difficult thing to recount? just
Well,
to be sure?
essentially, and this is where I leave it up to your legal counsel, because ultimately, you guys are the election officer. The county, we contracted with you, but we definitely work with you through the process. But according to the code, my attorney, and I think Paul talked with you this afternoon, Brian, they're looking into those possibilities. It's something that, as far as we know, and I'm not speaking as the attorney or legal counsel, but it would take more than just calling for a recount again. There has to be additional steps, but I defer to Mr. Jones on that.
Yeah, I'll weigh in there and just say, Mr. Jones, from the county attorney's office, Paul Jones, so Mr. Jones and Mr. Jones, I think we have perhaps a little bit of a difference of opinion, or at least an unresolved interpretation of a gray area regarding what the options are here. I think Mr. Jones has correctly pointed out to Mr. Thompson that once the results are final, the only way for anyone to contest the results or to contest the election is for the candidate who's interested in contesting it to file an action with the court contesting the results and asking for the judge to order a recount. And under state law, really, that's the only way to, where we are in agreement is under state law, that's the only real way to accomplish what we think of as a recount other than for the petition that happens when it's within the 0.25% like we saw here. Where we probably have a little bit of a difference of opinion is, since there's no guidance whatsoever in the statute as to this question, I believe that the Board of Canvassers, as the certifying body, has the ability to rescind its previous action if it wants to, under just general principles of parliamentary procedure for a decision-making body. Now, that general principle is that you can rescind things that are not yet final. There's not really any guidance here about when the canvass results become final. So that's kind of an open question. I'll just say that it's a gray area. What I think the options are for the Board of Canvassers is to, the one, probably the least controversial option is to indicate to the county that they would like the county, as recognizing that Ms. Weiss is the election officer, but to indicate to the county as the contracted provider for election services that they would like all reasonable efforts to be taken to determine the results of those votes, and wait to see what the result of that is. And if those results are able to be tabulated and it doesn't affect the outcome of the race, then the least controversial thing is to just let the previous canvass and certification stand, because it does correctly identify who the candidates are. If those results are able to be tabulated and it somehow changes the outcome of the case, of the race, I believe that the Board of Canvassers could call a special meeting and rescind its previous certification and certify the new results. Now, there's no state law saying that you can do that. Mr. Jones from the county and I talked about it. I'm not sure he's convinced that my position is accurate, and I don't know that necessarily matters at this point, but and we don't know what the lieutenant governor's position on that is, but that's my feeling about what the board is able to do. Now, the more interesting question probably becomes, what if the county tries to but can't easily or reasonably tabulate those results? And at that point, then you come into kind of a tricky legal situation where, again, my belief is that the council or the board of canvassers, could most likely rescind its previous result and refuse to actually certify the results until it was satisfied that it had received accurate numbers. The problem with that is that's gonna raise challenges from other parties, and it's, I think, unclear. It's a gray area whether that's really something you can do or not. So at this point, my advice is to simply indicate to the county that we would like all reasonable efforts to be made to tabulate those results to see if it makes a difference and see how that plays out.
I would like to make that motion.
Okay, we have a motion from Mr. Stewart to that effect. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Santiago. And then before we go into board discussion on that, are there further questions for Mr. Thompson?
I'd just like to say that I'm just looking for the best effort. I'm not looking to, if they can't do it, I'm not probably in favor of taking any kind of other action, but at least we should make an effort.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just address Councilman Stewart and
Sure.
just give you a couple things to think about as you go into discussion on this. As we discussed this morning, that actually is our plan to continue on for the next 2-3 days, looking at all the options and doing all we can, because most importantly, we want to give you as a council and the Board of Canvass a sense of assurance that 150 votes in that mayoral race didn't change. And so that is our top priority. That's what we are working towards and will continue to work towards. And we've also contacted the Lieutenant Governor's office. We're talking to them about that. In addition, the vendor is regularly, they're the ones, by the vendor, they're the ones that have the Dominion voting system that we used. They're familiar with the software, and they're already talking with their people in their programming department to see if we can identify the batches and then open them up. We do have a digital copy of every single ballot in addition to a hard copy of every single ballot. When they're scanned, they go through, and it's from that digital copy we do the adjudication. But we also have physically the hard copy of every ballot that was voted on. So we have the means to go ahead and do what we can. As Mr. Winterton remembers, back in 2011, we had a very interesting experience in his race. It was only a 6-vote difference. And that was a paper ballot that the Provo City contracted with the county to do. And then a recount came up, and we did a double-blind count. That day we had the press and everyone there. We looked at everything, and the 2 separate teams counted separately, and then they swapped, and it was recounted, and it came out exactly on with that scrutiny. So we do have process in place, and I assure you that we will explore every option. And so personally, as one involved in this, I'm in favor of the motion that Councilman Stewart has put forward, and we'll do everything to uphold and sustain that and help out.
Thank you. Mr. Winterton.
I'm also interested, as we talked earlier today, is about what we've learned through the process. This is our first time with vote by mail. I'd love you, Brian, to come back and talk to us and tell, so that we can, I appreciate the number of votes. I'm disappointed that it takes so long, but that's life, it maybe. And so I'd like to learn what we learned and the trade-offs that we're going to be getting as we continue, if we continue this, and what we, so at some point maybe come back and talk to us about all those issues, because we're going to have to make that decision.
Yeah, in fact, I would love to come to a work session, city council meeting, because there are trade-offs. When you have 30,000 of your votes that come by the night before election, then 25,000 show up in the mail on election day, and because they're signatures that you got to verify, we just don't have the means to do it as quickly. So the convenience to the voter is a trade-off for the timing of the results. But we're learning statewide. There's other counties that are doing things too, and I'd be more than willing to come back and and share this, as our county commissioners have already asked, because they need to make a decision as to what they're going to do this next year. And we've offered the same thing. We're an open book, and do whatever we can to help you understand so you can make the decision that is best for the citizens of Provo.
Mr. Harding?
I'm encouraged by what you shared with us a moment ago. I understand, that at this point you can't give us that 100% assurance. I understand, and I think we need to be patient with the process. This is the first time that we've done the vote by mail, and it takes some time to work out the wrinkles. But I think what is important, and again, I'm encouraged to hear what you said, is not just the board of canvassers, but the public needs to have confidence in the fairness of the outcome, and to hear the experience with the double blind and how the numbers came out, that gives a lot of confidence, where the additional votes that we saw kind of tick in across all of them, and they are fairly proportional, but there's enough irregularities in this that I think that it kind of strikes a little bit at that question of fairness and accuracy. So I appreciate your office's willingness. Hopefully this doesn't happen in the future. It doesn't need to happen in the future, but because this is the first time and we're working out the kinks, I appreciate your willingness to work with us and do what's necessary in order to give confidence to the public.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if I just make one last comment.
Sure.
To Councilman Winterton. We regularly hold a election, we call it a postmortem, where we go through, we look at the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything. We actually are meeting with all the city recorders on Thursday and getting their input from their experiences. We've already had a preliminary with the staff, and we will continue to do that. And every election that I've been involved with, we have made sure that we have implemented changes where needed as far as the continuous improvement. After the situation we found with Councilman Winterton's election, we found that we had some flaws in our IT department that initially caused some concern in that race, and we went ahead and we fixed those, and we actually have an on-site additional person that we pay for to be there and double-check things. And that person was there Saturday, and they are helping us determine why this difference was there too. It's the same company, a different person, but no, we will continually improve and move forward. So thank you for your opportunity that you've given me to explain the situation. And most importantly, I want to make sure that you and the public have confidence in this process.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We really appreciate you coming today. Any further questions? Okay, thank you. We'll bring it back to the board for discussion of the motion then. Mr. Harding.
I apologize. We were hoping this would be quick, but could we have an explanation again on what the motion is and what the process we foresee would be?
My understanding of the motion, I guess since Mr. Stewart said he just moved to do what I said, my
It's normal for me.
What was that?
That's normal for me to do what you said.
Right. My understanding of the motion is simply to indicate to the county the board's desire that they take all reasonable efforts to tabulate the results from those additional 150 votes and then report back. And then I had indicated, so I think that's the motion. And then I had indicated that based on the outcome of that there were some other options that you might take.
So I guess two things. First is, I hope we're looking at more than just the 150, because particularly if there's adjudication, I don't know if there's records of how does the adjudication ever change when it gets flagged again, and we look, or are we only looking at this 150? I guess I'm curious. Is it a total recount? Is that the process that we went through already? Is that what we're asking to happen again? Or is it just like, hey, we found 150 that weren't there before, and now we're going to make sure they're tallied correctly and add them to the old totals? So that
I can address my motion. It did not include a full recount.
Okay. Okay, so that, I guess that's one question that I have. And then the second one is, are we looking to accept the election results tonight, or was it we're going to wait for a few days, or we're just going to rely on what we've already accepted before and then consider later on something? So what's the for tonight?
The resolution that's in front of you tonight is solely about the recount and the race between West Marriott and Hunter Phillips. So based on the report that you've heard, unless you have some additional reason to believe that there was a problem with that recount, I don't see any reason not to go ahead and act on the resolution that's in front of you, and to certify because all it does is certify that Wesley Marriott is the second place candidate and that he is nominated to go forward to the general election. So I don't see any reason not to act on that. And then your next step is based on what you hear back from the county as far as their process and what they've been able to do.
Because those 150 votes are then basically in this, we have looked at those 150 votes and we're fairly comfortable that, I hate the word fairly comfortable when you're talking in an election, because I want to be sure. But we're saying that those 150 votes have been counted and that there really is not any question.
Well, what we're saying is that those 150 votes were received during the original election and that they were scanned in, but that whatever those votes were never included in the tabulation of the results during the original election. So we're saying that we don't know how they affect the original numbers, but that just by way of kind of thinking about the statistical odds, that in order for those 150 votes to make a difference in the mayoral election.
I'm just talking about this one, not the mayoral one. So
right.
We have counted those 150 towards the
towards this.
Council.
Sorry, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Towards this race, those 150 votes have been counted and included.
Okay, and that's what's important to me. Just make sure that's done.
Mr. Harding?
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this a little bit. So we feel that there was a full recount for the citywide race, and we feel that all of the votes that had previously been tallied were tallied correctly, were assigned to the correct candidate, and then by doing a recount, I guess maybe even just understanding what physically happens in a recount, but during a recount, somehow we have identified 150 additional ballots that were received but weren't counted, or were received but during processing were just set aside because the intent couldn't be determined, and then they were looked at more closely and were adjudicated to determine intent.
I think probably, Mr. Thompson, I could repeat to you what he told me this morning, but it's probably better to hear it from him.
Please.
Yeah, essentially, what was discovered is that there was, in the process of scanning the ballots, we had two different servers, and the scanners on one scanned ballots, and then those results were put on a thumb drive and then moved across the room, because we don't want to do anything online, and put in the main server that then prints the report and shows the results. And we had another server. And what it appears happened, and once again, I don't know for sure, but we feel pretty strongly, is it appears that there was a batch of those votes that are in question here that never got transferred from that server that did the scanning to the final tabulation. But when we did the recount, which I was there Friday night and Saturday morning, we just asked multiple questions. The vendor right there and the IT person doing it at that time said, "Oh, yeah, I've got these votes, and yeah, they need to go over." And so once we saw that, we're now wondering and trying to trace through that to see if those votes actually did not get polled when it came to the 29th canvas material that we gave you. But it definitely, I feel very confident that it was there on the recount. And so in this recount, it's there that it appears. And what we're trying to do to save a full recount is we're trying to identify those batches now, because once they got put into the hopper, because if we can open up those batches and pull out the hard copies, we can show you on those that came over and the additional votes in this race. We can then show you, and here were the votes that were in the mayoral race, and then you can see statistically that a pattern carried through. So I hope that answers your question, Councilman.
In part.
Okay.
Partly. And it, to me, it raises additional questions as well. I mean, just the you know, and it's nice when there are not close races because little mistakes don't matter. But in close races, little mistakes can
Get magnified.
Get magnified, and you know, how confident are we that we collected all of the batches or whatever those are called, and are we confident? I like what you did with the double blind recount and things where you have independent numbers. Could we have looked at the ballots cast in both the mayoral and the citywide, and those should have added up? And if I understood your last description, it sounded like, was that orphaned batch? Was that not counted in either of the races? So that's the thought. Is it was not added to either of the race?
One of the things that we're looking at is how many total batches were counted in the original race versus in the recount. And because in the recount, we actually scanned all the batches again, all the ballots countywide, and only turned on the citywide race.
Okay.
And looked at the results there. So we have different things. It's just going to take us a day or two to go through that. We've started the process so we can check, and then we can, even if we have to manually, because every batch is assigned a number. And then every batch, also the physical envelopes that are scanned, go into an envelope that's marked on the outside they've been scanned, and that number is written there. So it'll take us a day or two, but we can drill down, and that's what we're working on, is to do that.
Okay,
If I might comment, I think the only thing we're looking for, if we can identify those 150 votes, just count those 150 votes and see how they're distributed.
That's the concept, Councilman.
Right, that's the concept I have. So it's only those 150 votes that would be looked at, and it just gives it more assurance.
Okay, so there's still a little uncertainty about the mayoral race, but with the full recount and the new tallying and all of that, we're confident that this recount for the citywide race is a true representation of the vote.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. As part of what you're doing with those additional 150 ballots, I would appreciate it if we got a full count for all of the individuals in the mayor race, just even though we probably won't end up recertifying it, just so the public will know how it.
Yeah, no, I think definitely that's part of it, just to show the statistics carry through. Yes.
That would be great. And then I just had a suggestion too for this resolution. Considering the number of additional votes, I would appreciate if we listed the vote totals for all 4 candidates in the city race. So I guess I'm proposing an amendment to the resolution.
I'm sorry, I know I need to speak in the mic. So part 1, instead of just listing the votes for the 2 candidates involved with the recount, then we will go ahead and list all of the candidates, all 4 candidates, and their vote totals.
If that's agreeable with other board members.
Yes.
Mr. Strachan?
And before you take that final decision on this one, you still have a motion?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, yes, Ms. Santiago.
Would you mind just explaining the rationale for that and for having the 4?
The 4, because of the additional votes that were cast, if we only certify these 2, then we've got certified results from different vote totals? Yeah, so. All right, any other discussion? All right, I'll call for a vote on Mr. Stewart's motion then. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren and Mayor Curtis excused. Thank you. So I'd be looking for, I guess, a motion for an amendment to include the other two vote totals in here.
I have just one question
Yes.
about that. We've already certified it once. Is there a problem with two certifications, Brian?
I don't see why there would be, in the sense that really all you're really certifying is who gets to move on. The statute about the canvas is pretty clear that although we include the numbers in the canvas, that the legal function of the canvassing is just to declare who the winners are based on the returns. So I don't see any problem with that, and especially where in this case, there was a valid and legal petition for a recount, and you're just now saying what the numbers for the entire recount were. So.
Yes. We have a motion from Mr. Connect to that effect. Is there a second?
Question again, we're asking for a new
Just an amendment,
amendment to this, and then we'll have a vote on
and then we'll vote on it, yeah, to include all four vote totals from the recount.
I'll second the amendment.
And a second from Mr. Stewart. Is there any discussion on the motion?
And so the fourth person was quite a few, was less
Mike
votes
Roan.
by 1,000 or so more, right?
A few hundred, yeah.
Or, oh, it was just a few hundred?
500, I can't
I don't
remember.
remember for sure.
Okay. So, and we're including that one, just,
Just so the totals match, I think
So
is
that
the
the totals
idea, so
match?
that every vote is accounted for in this resolution.
okay.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Or,
I don't think you necessarily need those numbers, well, and there they are. But I was going to say, I don't think you need them to know whether you want them included necessarily, but you do need them before you vote on the final resolution. But here's a draft that shows the proposed amendment. I don't think we need to change anything in the first part. We do need to make a change to paragraph 6. Oh, wait, no, you changed it. Okay, it's fine.
Statement 1 says for the two candidates relevant to the recount.
Oh, right, yeah, take that out. Yeah, just delete it all the way back to election in paragraph 1. Sure. I mean, you could add right there. Just say according to the recount. Kelsey, can you scroll up to the preamble and just? No, I'd go ahead and leave that. Or were you? Oh, citywide position, Provo, Utah. You'd probably take all of that out. Or let's see. Oh, I see what you're saying now. Okay, you probably don't need Provo, Utah, but it's fine for it to be there. Whatever. I don't see any changes that need to be made there. That looks good to me. Pending the motion.
Can you just slowly continue to scroll up in case anyone else has concerns about the rest of it?
Well, I actually like it the way that it is because I don't think that this canvas affects Dave Sewell's nomination because he was not technically, in my view, part of the recount. But
Okay, are there any other concerns or questions about the motion before we vote? All right, I'll call for a vote again then on the motion. And again, this is just to amend it as shown, and then we'll have a separate vote to actually do the certification. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren and Mayor Curtis excused. All right, so the next step is to actually pass the resolution. Is there any more advice for us at this point, Mr. Jones?
no, I think you're good.
Any further discussion among council members?
I saw a report that was up on the screen. I think it was a canvas report or a recount report. That right there, canvas report. So the vote that we're about to take will be declaring and certifying the results of the recount. But it's the ordinance, or it's that resolution that we were just amending. It's not this report, correct? This report's different. Okay, thank you.
If there's no further discussion, then I'll call for a vote on the motion to pass the resolution.
Has there been a motion?
I will make that motion that we accept the resolution.
Okay.
And I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Winterton and
Second.
second by Mr. Harding. I guess I'm getting too used to the implied motion. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously with Mr. Van Buren and Mayor Curtis excused. And I believe we have no further business tonight. So if there's no objection, we'll declare the meeting adjourned by unanimous consent. Thank you very much.
Thank you for including me.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Stewart.